Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having us here today. And Director, thank you for your service. I really appreciate it. And it's tough sometimes, but thank you very much. Well, Ranking Member Cartwright's already spoke a good bit about the whole issue of cutting 22% back. And when we hear what the talking points out there, it's really two things: fentanyl and then our country's less safe. So on the fentanyl side, 108,000 deaths, overdoses, 80% were fentanyl. Could you talk a little bit about the Jalisco cartel, the Sonora cartel, and talk about how they have infiltrated the U.S. a little bit, which you can say in an unclassified setting, the strength, and how it's gone from end to end in our country, and then what would happen to you with those type of devastating cuts of 22%, and that ability, again, as Mr. Cartwright talked about, to work with local and state law enforcement, as your partners.
So I appreciate the question. I guess a couple things. The first thing I would say, and the chairman and I had a conversation about this point, which is that as alarming as the 107,000, 108,000 overdose death number is and should be to everyone in America, the untold story is that because of greater availability of Narcan and better first response, which is a good thing for America, that number is actually in some ways better than the problem really is, because there's more overdose that are being adequately responded to, and people are being resuscitated, and that's a good thing. But if you're trying to measure how serious the problem is, how big the threat is, in some ways the overdose deaths, as shocking as 107,000 is, in some ways doesn't quite do it justice. The cartels, obviously, we just had a major indictment. The chairman referenced it, related to the Sinaloa cartel. The Jalisco cartel is obviously very significant, too. I mentioned that we have transnational organized crime task forces that are focused specifically on that threat. We work on the OCDEF strike forces against the threat. I think part of the reason it's so challenging, what you have essentially are precursors, almost, very heavily coming from China, and there's actors in China who seem all too willing, all too happy to send these chemicals to Mexico, where they're then produced by the cartels, sent across the border, and distributed by gangs here in the United States, all over the country. And one of the challenges about something like fentanyl is that the cartels no longer require acres of farmland or to wait for a harvest or something like that, right? These are things that can be done all year long in very small spaces that are harder to detect, easier to get across the border. And then if you combine that with the potency, the lethality of the substance, and you combine that with the fact that it's now finding its way into all sorts of other drugs, including prescriptions that are essentially adulterated, you start to get a sense of why this is such a almost epically and historically challenging threat.
So to kind of sum it up, we've got this product that's 30 times cheaper to make per kilo than heroin, 50 times more potent than heroin. And would you give me a yes or a no answer? These budget cuts, will that mean we have many more dead Americans?
I just don't see how it could be otherwise. As I said in response to an earlier question, we have seizures, especially from our offices that touch the border, but not exclusively, all the time, that in one seizure are seizing enough fentanyl that if distributed would have been enough to wipe out an entire state, in terms of the dosage. So you just take away 5 or 6 seizures and you've got, significant impact.
And I think your point about the overdose deaths have been prevented by Narcan is a really good point, because sometimes we're looking at things are trending even and we're trying to declare victory. But if it wasn't for the Narcan, wow, we'd be underwater completely. Take for 1 second, I only have a minute left, but during this appropriations hearing, there's been to talk about the budgetary needs. There's been a lot of opportunities to score sound bites on the other side on baseless theories attacking the FBI and our thousands of patriotic agents trying to protect us from all these threats. Talk about morale at the FBI on the unfounded political attacks. How does that affect your ability to recruit and retain?
So, you know, of course, our people are human just like anybody else, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers to, their lives to, their families to, unfairly criticized. But I will tell you that our people are focused on the mission, on the work, on who they serve. And our recruiting, as I mentioned in response to Judge Carter's question, has actually been going very well. It's gone up very significantly since I've been in this role. After the first couple of years where it was sort of flat, then 2019 went up significantly. This year, applications are coming in faster than they did last year, and we're at an all-time high in terms of the number of onboard agents. So in terms of law enforcement professionals, 30 to 40% of them that are former military, former law enforcement, 50% of them have advanced degrees. These are people with a lot of choices in this job market, and they're registering their view of the FBI by trying to sign up and devote their lives to working with us. Inside the organization, our attrition rate, by that I mean people retiring early, is less than 1%, which is better than probably any public or private organization out there. And the number of people applying for extensions past mandatory retirement age, you know, is high, and it's again in this pretty competitive job market. So, would I wish that we weren't unfairly criticized? Of course, but everybody at Quantico gets asked, "What is your why?" And nobody's why is, "Well, I don't want to get criticized." Everybody's why is, "I want to serve the American people," and as long as we can keep doing that and working with the great people we get to work with, we'll be okay.
Well, thank you for your resilience. I yield back.
Mr. Clyde.